everyone, I'm Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and today I am going to make a little pea pod for you guys. Many of you know prior to this video that I am expecting a fourth baby, so I decided to do a little pea pod, and in honor of Mother's Day coming up, do a little Mother's Day gift idea for you guys if you guys have somebody special that you want to make one for, or like in my case, just making it for yourself. This little pea pod necklace is going to require the use of herringbone stitch and also brick stitch. If you don't know those stitches, that's okay. I'm going to teach you them in the video as we go. If you need any of the materials to do the pea pod pendant, you can look on the video below it. There's a little date stamp that'll say the date that the video was published, and we'll have additional information below that. Usually there's a little down arrow or a show more button. You can click on that and I'll give you links to all the different products if you do want to shop with me online, or you can also go to your local Potomac Bead Company store and shop there as well. Also in the top right corner, there's a little eye. If you move your mouse over, that's information from us, the video creators, which will also give you links to some of those different products as well. So for the pea pod, you can really kind of make it the length and the size of your choosing to use whatever you want to put in the middle as the peas. Some of them you can do birthstones. You can do the amount of children. You can just make it a fun necklace too to wear even if you don't have any kids. But you're going to be needing approximately 1.5 grams of seed beads, and I'm using the 11.0 delica bead. You could use the 11.0 regular seed beads too. That's kind of up to you. I like the way for the pea pod how the delicas sit in that nice herringbone. So I am using delicas for this project. For the pea pod that I did as the example, I used the emerald gold luster of them, and you can see I barely kind of put a dent in the tube here because you're only using a little bit more than 1 gram of the seed beads. For the one that we're doing together, I'm going to be using 2 different colors, multi-tone, that way you can wear it kind of with everything. And I also have some 15-0s that I'm going to add in. On the example piece, I have just the rice pearls and then those seed beads, but with herringbone stitch, you often see thread on the side. If you look closely, you can see the thread there. However, I used green thread with these green seed beads, so you really don't see it. On the one that we'll be making together with this gold and silver Duracoat gold and Duracoat silver delica beads, I'm going to be using some white thread. Because I don't want to see the thread on the sides, I'm also going to be adding some 15-0s on the sides of the herringbone stitch, which will just be right on the outer edge here. That way you won't see the thread on the outer edge. So again, I have my delicas, which I'll be using a majority of my Duracoat galvanized gold. And then I'm just going to do the center of the pea pod with my silver. So I'm not going to need as many. And depending on how long you make it, you're going to need, if you want to do some 15-0s, between 17 and like 24, 25 of them, just to kind of decorate the inner edge. For the peas, or for the middle of it, in this design here, I have these 4x6 millimeter or so rice pearls, 5x6 millimeter. I'm going to be using round glass pearls in the 6 millimeter. So these are check glass pearls in a 6 millimeter bright white round. For the example piece, I have a soldered closed 5 millimeter ring, and I'm going to show you guys how to either use the ring, or in the case of the video, we'll go ahead and use a wire guard. That way you can put on an additional ring for whatever you want to string it on. If you want to string it on a chain or a piece of leather, or make something beaded for it as well. So we'll use a wire guard or a wire protector, and I have a silver one here to kind of pick up the silver and gold as we work. You'll need a size 12 needle. You can use a size 11 too if you want, but a 12 is going to go through the delicas easier as we go in and sew the top and the bottom of this herringbone brick stitch. I also have sitting handy a thread zap, and this is a thread burner. You can do the thread zap ultra, the cord cutter, whatever your fancy is for your thread burners. And then I also have my needle nose pliers here. The reason I have a needle nose pliers is because when I burn the thread off the spool of that .006 wildfire, it's nice to flatten out the edge of it in order to thread your needle. So to get started, I want you to get about 4 feet of beading thread onto your needle. And you can go ahead and pour little piles of your beads in order to get started. Go ahead and push your peas off to the side and out of the way, and we'll start off with our delica beads. Once you have your thread on your needle, I want you to put a stop bead on the thread. This is a bead that's going to come off the project eventually, and usually one that's still on my bead mat or my nice workable surface that is not included in my project that I can easily see is not included. Like I said, we are going to be learning herringbone stitch and brick stitch. In order to connect the brick stitch and the herringbone stitch, you're also going to be learning ladder stitch. We're going to be doing 8 rows of ladder stitch that is 2 wide. Where you're going to see this kind of come into play is right here at the top of the pea pod. Going along here, we're going to do 8 rows of this ladder stitch to create the gap, or to create the connecting point between the herringbone stitch and the brick stitch. So herringbone stitch, if you're not familiar with it, it kind of looks like fish scales. I love the look of herringbone stitch, and we'll be kind of starting off with the ladder stitch, going on to the brick stitch here at the end, and then going into the herringbone. So our ladder stitch, because I'm doing 2 colors, I'm going to start with my silver beads, which are going to be the very end here of my pea pod. If you're doing it all one color, don't worry about picking up the silver first, because you're picking up all one color bead. Because I'm doing 2 different colors, I'm going to pick up my 2 silvers, because I said I'm just going to use them on the inner edge here, and then I'm going to go for the gold. So I have 2 silver delicas on the needle and 2 gold delicas after that on my needle. I'm letting that drop down next to my stop bead, and I'm going to make the gold sit right next to the silver by taking the needle and thread, sewing through the silver beads away from the stop bead toward the gold bead. What that is going to do is sit those gold beads right next to the silver. From there, I'm going to sew down the gold beads, which is bringing them towards the stop bead. That's going to make the gold beads and the silver beads sit nicely next to one another. This is now 2 rows of my ladder stitch, and I have 6 more to go. The first, or the next of the 6, the first 5 are going to be gold. So I have 2 gold beads that I just put on in a circle with my thread going through the row that the needle is coming out of. The thread's coming out the bottom. I'm going to put the needle into the top of those 2 gold beads after adding 2. Pull that thread down nice and tight, and then sew up through the 2 that you just added. This is going to bring the thread on the opposite side of the starter beads. Again, 2 more gold to do row 4, sewing in the opposite side of that previous row. Is going to bring the 2 that you just added right next to it, and then you sew down the 2 that you just added. So this is ladder stitch for those of you that don't know your stitches and kind of just follow along. Now you can say you know ladder stitch. Threads coming out of the bottom of that last row of ladder. I add 2 beads, put the needle into the top and bring it out towards the bottom where it's coming out of. That's going to pull those 2 down again. I'm going to take my thread and needle and go through the 2 new ones that I just added. Give a nice little tight yank. So I have 4 rows right now of the gold. I'm going to do a 5th row of the gold. Go back down through. So again, we want to get 8 rows. So right now I have 6 rows. I'm going to do 1 more gold because I want my 7th row to be gold. And then the 8th row is going to be the one that is going to be an exterior part of the pod. So I'm going to switch back to silver. So my last and 8th row, so the 1st row and the 8th row are going to be silver, and the middle 6 rows are going to be gold. So there I have it. From here, I'm going to go in and actually do my brick stitch now. So you just learned how to do ladder stitch. Again, we have 6 rows of gold in the middle and 1 row of silver at the end, at either end. So we have 8 rows total. The reason we want 8 rows is because whenever you do herringbone stitch, you want to make sure that you have an even number, because herringbone works in groups of 2. So there, right here is the first set of 2, and so forth. Like I said, we're going to learn brick stitch now. So brick stitch is a stitch that as you go naturally gets smaller and smaller, which is going to result in a triangle or a V shape that it's coming into. Whenever you start brick stitch, you always start each row with 2 beads. From there, you add 1 bead at a time. The idea of brick stitch is that the beads are going to sit nice and flat right above the previous beads in the row. So I have turned my project over so that my stop bead is right at the top. For my first row of brick stitch, I'm going to add 7 beads. Those 7 beads are going to sit on top of the 8 rows of my ladder stitch. To start, like I said, you add 2 beads first. Because I'm doing silver on the outer edge, I have a silver bead and then a gold bead. Every time you do brick stitch, you're going to pick up what are called bridge threads, that are the threads that go over and combine one side to the other, or connect one bead to the other. This is my first bridge thread. Because I'm adding 2 beads, I'm going to skip over and sew underneath the second bridge thread. That second bridge thread, there's also 2 threads there. Go ahead and make sure that you're sewing underneath both bridge threads. Pull those through, and those beads are going to kind of sit on an angle. The thread then and needle are going to come back up through the second bead, that gold bead, so that the bead sits nice and straight up. So you're going to sew from the gold bead, from the bottom of it, towards the top, which is going to be towards the silver bead. And pull that nice and tightly in. From here now we add 1 bead at a time. So we're onto our gold beads. I'm going to add 1 gold bead onto my needle. Go over to the next bridge thread. Sew under that bridge thread. So you're sewing kind of between the 2 beads. Sew under the bridge thread. And then sew back up through the bead. So that way that delica sits right nice and on top of that row. There you can see it. I'm going to continue this the whole way down to the end of my ladder stitch, going under the bridge threads here, under both of them if you have 2. Every other one you're going to have 2. You're sewing underneath that bridge thread, pulling the thread the whole way through, and then you're going to sew back up through your delica bead. Again, add a bead under the bridge thread, and back up through the bead. Going under that bridge thread, just to show you kind of in slow motion, that creates a little loop there, and then you're pulling that loop nice and tight. I'm going to continue on till I get to my last little bridge, and for that last bridge, I will use a silver bead to follow with the pattern. So I'm at my last little bridge here. I'm going to pick up a silver and go through that bridge thread, pull the thread through, and then back up through the silver delica. There you can see I went from 8 beads to 7 beads. So there's 5 gold beads in the middle, and there's 1 silver on either end. From here, when you're looking at your pea pod, that's going to be right here kind of at the top where things are connecting. I'm going to do 1 more grouping where I do silver, and then I'm going to finish up with gold on the last 2. From here, the next line of our brick stitch is going to go from 7 beads to 6 beads, because we're naturally with brick stitch going to go down in the count. Again, whenever you start brick stitch, you are going to use 2 beads for your first one in each row. So I have on one silver and one gold. I'm skipping the first bridge thread and going into the second. Go back up through the gold. And a lot of people will say, but the first bead doesn't want to cooperate and sit correctly. As we get and we add the next row, that first bead will kind of sit nicely and cooperate. From here, I'm going to add on 3 more gold. So I have 4 gold in the middle. Going through that bridge thread. And on to the next, to the end of the row. You can see I'm pulling a lot of thread through because I have that 4 feet of thread on there. Going underneath the thread then. And brick stitch makes really lovely pieces too. Makes a nice brick looking wall. So here on the end, after I add my 4 gold, I'm going to add my 6th bead in, which is my silver bead. Going underneath the thread there. And then back up. So here I did 6 beads. I'm going to do a row of 5 beads and then a row of 4 beads and stop. Like I said, from here on, my row of 5 and my row of 4, I'm just going to do with the gold because when that comes together, I want the silver to stop. So from here, to start my row of my 5 beads, I pick up 2 beads, skip over from the first to the second bridge, sew under, and again, remember I skipped to 2 gold, and then back up. So you're just going to continue with this row of 5, and then on to the row of 4 beads as well. So I'm at the point now where I have 4 beads there at the top. This is all the further that I'm going to go to get my little pod shape here. So I'm not going to keep going to 3, 2, and 1 bead. I'm stopping here where I have 4 beads. From here, your thread should be on the right-hand side with the stop bead on the left. I'm going to take my thread and needle down the left-hand side, all the way down the very last row of beads till I get to the base of the silver. So I'm sewing down these 6 beads on the opposite side. What that's going to do is create a little bit of a thread gap because I'm going from the right over to the left. I'm just going to give a little tight pull and let that thread kind of overlap. And what's going to happen is it's going to close that up a tiny bit and have those beads closed a little bit. From here at the bottom, I'm going to keep mine open just a little bit so you guys can see, and that way I can hold this thread nice and flat. If you want to keep yours nice and closed, you can. Like I said, I'm going to let mine open. It'll make a little bit of a thread gap at the base for me, but it won't be that much of a problem, and you won't see that much. But I am going to keep it open so that way you guys can learn the herringbone stitch now in a much flatter kind of method. But while you're doing it, if you can, pull that in nice and tight, and it's going to be a little bit rounded while you're doing the herringbone stitch. So I'm ignoring that stop bead and kind of just pushing it out of the way. And what we're going to do now is go from the end of the ladder stitch here into herringbone. The rows and the amount of herringbone that you do are going to be dependent on what size beads you use. And we'll kind of go over that more as we learn herringbone. Herringbone is done by doing 2 beads at a time. They're going to sit in almost like a Y shape. And we're going to connect groups of 2 to groups of 2. We started out with 8 pieces of our ladder stitch. So 8 rows of our ladder stitch, which is going to equate to 4 rows of herringbone. On the outer edge, I'm going to use my silver bead because I'm doing silver on the outside and then gold. With the herringbone coming out that last row of the ladder stitch, I pick up a silver and a gold. I'm going to sew down through the second bead, the gold bead, of that ladder stitch and bring those 2 beads so they sit in that little Y or that little V opening. From there, take your needle through the third bead in that ladder stitch, which is going to be the second gold bead in, and come up. Give a nice little tight pull, and those seed beads will sit even more in the V. From here, I'm going to add my next row of herringbone, which is 2 beads, and they're both going to be gold. Skip over to the next bead in the row and sew down. So I'm always coming out a bead, adding 2 beads, and sewing down a bead. Pull those 2 beads so they want to sit correctly, and then we're going to sew up through the next gold bead in our ladder stitch line. If it wants to cooperate. And sew up. When I'm coming out the top then, so that's my 2 rows of my herringbone, I'm going to create my 3rd row of my herringbone, adding 2 beads and sewing down the next bead from that ladder stitch row. Let those 2 beads sit in that Y. And now I'm going to create my 4th row of my herringbone by going up through the second to last bead, which is my gold bead. And coming out the top, I'm going to grab 1 gold and 1 silver and sew down the silver on the end. That gets me my first row of my herringbone stitch. Again, the herringbone stitch is groups of 2, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of my herringbone coming off of 8 beads of my ladder stitch. To increase and to keep adding onto the herringbone, your thread, I'm going to flip to the other side so that way it's more comfortable to hold. So I just flipped from one side to the other because I like to sew with my right side. Whenever my thread is coming out the end, I'm going to pick up one of those Crystal Labrador Full 15-0s and sew up through the last bead that I put on in that herringbone row. Your thread then is going to be coming up here through the first middle herringbone row. Add on 2 more beads, always in groups of 2. We're adding on 1 silver and 1 gold. So down through the second bead in that first herringbone row, that gold bead, and that's going to start our second row of our herringbone. Go up then through the first bead toward the center of the second herringbone row. Add 2 more beads. So down through the other side of that herringbone stitch. Sewing up through the bead here on the 3rd row, coming out towards the center. Add 2 more gold and sew down through the bead, the second bead in that herringbone row. Getting to the end then, we're going to sew up the bead of the herringbone stitch, and I'm on my end, so I know I want to do my gold and a silver bead. Sew down through the silver bead on the last herringbone row. When I'm off the side here, I'm going to flip it in my hands so I make it more comfortable. Pick up a 15 and sew back up through. So I'm getting ready to add my 3rd row of my herringbone stitch. With my green pod, I didn't bother to add the 15-0. I just sewed right back up through the last bead of the row that I added. So you don't have to put on the 15, that's optional and that's kind of up to you. The reason that I'm putting it on here is because I don't want to see any of that white thread. The reason I didn't put it on in the green, because you really don't see it with those green beads. So it's kind of optional whether or not, you want to add those 15-0s. From here, I'm going to continue the herringbone stitch, coming up the middle of my row of herringbone, adding my 2 beads, kind of making them cooperate if they don't want to sit. Going over to the next row, sewing up the first bead, adding 2 beads, sewing down the second bead. Adding the next row, sewing up the first bead, adding 2 beads, sewing down the second row. up to the last one. Coming out, add your gold and silver. So down the second bead, which is the silver bead, and threads coming out. To step up to the next row, add a 15-0. I flip it in my hand, and I add that silver bead in. And get ready to add the next row. So you can see it kind of sits disconnected in a V shape until you go in and keep adding and adding rows. Like I said, the length that you have of your herringbone stitch is going to depend on how big the beads are that you have in the middle here. You can see the pod actually opens up too, and you can kind of get an idea how many rows that you need. If you're looking for kind of an example, I have about 22 to 24 rows of my herringbone stitch here. I'm going to continue with that herringbone, and yours, if you did a nice tight pull and kind of pulled that thread in a little bit, yours is going to be bent just a tiny little bit into a curved section. Continue with that herringbone stitch for another 20 rows or so, and then we'll see whether or not your middle beads fit in, because you're going to want them to fit in right along the herringbone stitch. So that's how you know when you need to stop. You can also make the pod so it doesn't have something in the middle at one end or the other. It's kind of up to you where you want to sew in. But if you want to follow along with me, whatever beads you're putting in the middle are going to be the length of your herringbone stitch. So I've come to the kind of end of my herringbone stitch. I actually ended up with 18 rows of my herringbone for my 6mm pearls. And again, what you want to do is lay out your beads that you're doing in the middle and judge your strip of herringbone here based on those beads. So you want to get that length. From the herringbone stitch now, we're going to go back and we're going to create ladder stitch before going in and creating brick stitch again. So it looks like kind of a little bracelet piece. To do so, we're going to repeat exactly what we did on the opposite side. So I'm going to go from the silver and then finish up with the gold. To start out, going from the herringbone stitch to the brick stitch, you want to get ready like you're adding your next row of your herringbone stitch. And instead, what you're going to do is add 4 beads, 2 silver, 2 gold. From there, I'm going to sew down through the gold bead on the opposite side of the herringbone stitch. As you can see then, that's going to create and group those 2 beads together. From here, I'm going to go back to the first bead in that herringbone stitch, up the 3 beads, and come out the top. From here, go down the 3 gold beads, the 2 that you added, and then the previous row. Getting over then to the next herringbone stitch, go up 1 bead, add 2 more gold, sew down through the 2 gold beads from the previous row of the ladder, and that's going to pull those gold beads down. Go ahead then and sew back up through the 2 that you just added. Pull nice and tight, and there's that ladder stitch starting to occur. Again, add 2 beads, sew down the bead on the opposite side of the herringbone stitch, go over to the first side, sew up those 3 beads, and out. From there, we're going to go down through the 2 beads that you just added and add on 2 more beads. You can go down 3 if you want to, that's kind of up to you, but I'm not going to bother. Add 2 more beads, so back through the 3 here on the previous row. That pulls those 2 beads in, back over to the next herringbone row, and up through the 2 beads that you just added. And that's going to connect that row in. So you can see you're adding that ladder stitch in. I'm going to dump out a couple more gold beads here. Adding that ladder stitch in 2 beads at a time, going down through the herringbone row, going up through the previous 3 beads, coming out the 2 that you just added. Add 2 more in gold. Oops. After you add the 2 in gold, downgrade them in that ladder stitch, going back through the 3 previous ones, the 2 that you added, and then down through the last herringbone bead and out. That's going to connect those. So we're just connecting 2 beads as we go, and then up through, coming out those 3 beads. As I get to the end then, and I'm ready for my last row, I'm going to switch to silver. Add my 2 silver beads, go down the last silver, up the last gold, and I'm only going to go up 2 beads of the last gold and come out before my row. The reason is because I want to get in now and do the brick stitch. So my thread and needle are coming out between the gold, the last 2 gold beads, and I'm just going to jump over so you won't see the thread and come out the final silver bead on the end. From here, I finished the ladder stitch, and we're going to get ready to downgrade and do the brick stitch on this end as well. So we're out our last silver bead, and it is brick stitch time. The brick stitch, yours may already be kind of pinched at the end a little bit. The brick stitch is just like we did before, where we are going to do 3 rows of brick stitch where we add a silver on the end, and then rows 5 and 4 of that brick stitch, I'm just going to switch to gold. So again, brick stitch, I have my 2 beads on my needle. I'm going from the first to the second bridge thread underneath. Pull my tail a little bit more. And when I'm underneath that bridge thread then, I'm going to sew back up through my delica bead. That's going to make that delica bead stand straight up. Add a bead, sew through the bridge thread, and so forth. So you guys already got a good 9 minutes on this previously, but you're just adding a bead, sewing underneath those threads, and then back up through the seed bead so it stands on its end. Again, I'm going to do this the whole way along the edge, tapering down, going from 7 to 6, 5, 4. When I'm on that 5th and 4th row, I'm going to switch to just gold and not use any of the silvers on the side. So at this point in my pod, I am down to my final row here of my brick stitch where I have my 4 beads. Here's where we have fun and get to actually make our little pea pod. So what we're going to do is kind of the same idea of ladder stitch, but what we're going to do is we're going to be joining one side to the other side. To do so, that's going to kind of pinch in the beads here, and we're going to be joining here about 4 beads deep. So what I want you to do is go down the opposite side, just like we did, down to 2 silver beads. So we're going down the first 2 gold, and then the first 2 silver, going from one side to the other. So we're jumping just like we did from one side to the other on the other end. This time we're really going to pull in though. Go over to the opposite side, up 4 beads. So you're going up the 4 beads, 2 silvers, 2 golds. You can see the thread there, and pull nice and tight and get that pod all closed up. From here, I'm basically going to do ladder stitch connecting at each little bridge. So I sewed down 4 originally, now I'm going to do 3. And I have it exposed there a little bit and not pulled tight so you can see it. I'm going to pull nice and tight now to get rid of all that extra thread. And I'm going to go up the 3 beads on the opposite side. Oops, not catching on to the fourth bead there. I'm basically sewing up then two of the two gold beads, coming out and sewing up through the two gold beads. That brings my pod in together and kind of finishes off my little pod. From here, I'm going to be adding in my beads then, and then we'll get to the other side and sew up the pod as well. To add the beads, I'm going to come out the middle of my herringbone. So I kind of have my two rows here, my silver and gold, 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 silver and gold. So we're going to be coming out between the two rows of our gold herringbone. To get my thread and needle in that position, and I should mention this is the bottom of the pod, and we're going to work our way back up to the top of the pod. So if you want to put anything dangling or anything hanging down there at the bottom of the pod, that's kind of up to you, but that's going to be the very bottom. You'll see just a tiny bit of thread exposed at the bottom, nothing to worry about. If you want to, you can sew a bead in right there to kind of block or to so you don't see thread. I'm not worrying about it. What I'm going to worry about is adding my beads and getting to the center. To do so, I'm going to go back through my seed beads here at the end, and I'm going back towards the middle spine of that herringbone row. So I'm just taking my thread and needle, tracing back along the beads, sewing through that brick stitch till I get to the middle. I don't want any thread exposed, so I'm sewing basically from one bead to the other. From here, I'm getting back to that kind of center spine right there along the middle. So I'm going to continue to sew back right along until we get to the center spine. Once I'm there, the center spine is going to have a thread bridge down the middle of it. So I'm almost to the middle here. Sewing up through those two ladder pieces. And once you're through two beads at once, right there in the center, you know that you're in the middle of the herringbone. From there, I'm going to poke my needle up through the herringbone so that way it comes out the center of my pea pod. Coming out the center of the pea pod then, the thread's just exposed there and hanging out. And we are going to sew in our little peas. So in my case here, I have my 4 peas that I'm going to sew in. I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to let those drop into my pea pod and push them right up along the thread. At this point, your thread and needle and your beads should be right at the end of the herringbone stitch. I'm going to go right to the center end of the herringbone stitch and sew through the center end of the herringbone, which is going to be right through, so the needle is going right from the front to the back, right near that brick stitch end. And that sews the beads right in there. You can see the beads can kind of still move around. That's fine. I want that. If you don't want your beads to move around the herringbone stitch, you can go in and individually sew them in from side to side rather than lengthwise. That's kind of up to you. So my thread's coming out the base right there and coming out the herringbone stitch. I'm going to grab onto the bridge thread and sew back up through my pod. The needle is then going to go back through and reinforce all of my pea pods, or my peas, along the pea pod. When it comes out the last bead, we're going to come out the back center of the herringbone stitch. So now I have 2 stitches through my peas here. What I'm going to do actually is get 1 more stitch through the peas. So I'm going to, just like the other side, grab onto that bridge thread and come back up. If you want, you can also sew through a bead. That's up to you. And then I'm going to sew down through that line again. It can be a little bit tricky to get that first bead and get your needle in there. But once you do, I'll go through the others pretty easily. Down the row then, and out the bottom. Give a nice tight pull, which will gap the pea pod a tiny bit, which is the effect that I want anyway, because those beads are going to be nice and tight in there. So cute. So now we are going to go down to the base line here and move that stop bead kind of out of the way. And we're going to get ready to sew up the top of the pod. I'm going to take my thread and needle through the herringbone stitch and out the back. From the back, I'm going to go up through the beads on an angle to make sure that no thread is exposed. And we'll get ready to close up that top of the pea pod and also then add in our wire guard or your soldered ring. So here I am coming to one of the end beads, and yours may already be pinched in a little bit. Again, remember, I didn't pinch mine in because I wanted to show you guys how to do the herringbone stitch. So you may see a little gap in thread there, not a big deal. From here, once you're on the outer edge, you're going to sew down through the 4 beads, just like you did on the opposite side. Move that stop bead kind of out of the way. It's going to pull those in nice and tight. Taking your thread and needle to the opposite side, we're going to sew up through the 4 beads on the opposite side, and that's going to pull our pod in. From here then, sew down through the 3 beads, coming out the first silver bead, just like we did on the opposite side. So from here, it's not really any sort of rocket science. Just going up through, sewing down 3 beads, up 3 beads. Next, down 2 beads, out the gold, and up the gold. Once I'm out these gold beads at the top then, it is time for me to add my wire guard. Or my ring, if you have a ring. So there's my little pea pod. So cute. You can see it kind of with frills almost, because those 15-0s almost look like frills. And then without. You can also see how the wider bead pushed the pod out a little bit. Here at the top now, I'm going to grab my wire guard and sew it in right at the top. If you have a closed ring that you're sewing in, you're just going to sew it on almost like a button, going from one corner to the other of your grouping here of your 4 beads. I'm going to add the wire guard in, going up through it, down the other side here, making sure my thread sits right nice and in, and I'm going to go on an angle through those top 4 beads, going from one side to the other. Pull that thread nicely, and I usually pinch the wire guard. It's kind of hard to see there, but I pinch it to make sure that the thread actually stays in the groove of the wire guard. You can see it's there. I'm going to sew through the bead next to it in that grouping of 4 and up, pulling that wire guard then more towards center. I'm going to sew up through the wire guard again, which is going to pull it, like I said, to the center, down the wire guard, and then down through the last bead in that group of 4. Same thing if I'm sewing on a closed ring, I just go through the ring rather than the wire guard. Once I make sure that it's on there nice and tight, I'm going to take the thread and needle, move the stop bead kind of out of the way, sew down through my first row of my gold beads here along the herringbone row till I get right next to my stop bead. So you can see I'm kind of moving it out of the way there. So I'm going to sew down through 2 more gold beads in that last row of my brick stitch. I'm trying to do 2 at once, but it doesn't want to go, so I might have to do 1 at a time. Oh, I got 2. Once I'm there, the thread and needle are actually going to be right beside where the stop bead is. So they're coming out of the same place. Take the stop bead off or push it up. Take those two threads. And you're just going to tie them together. If you want to, you can put a needle on the stop bead and kind of move it further back. I'm going to pull my thread nice and tight and then burn it down so you don't see it. If you want to also, you can do a little dab of glue. That's kind of up to you. After I pull that nice and tightly, I'm going to take the thread zap, the thread burner, burn off the starter thread, nice and short. Burn that down nice and flat. And then take my needle and thread, go down a little bit more towards the back of the project, sewing down some beads. You can see my kind of wiggling it out. And that's going to pull that knot then further in towards the back and towards the other beads. From there then I'll take the thread and needle down a couple passes and burn that off down here as well. Pushing that down then and have that burn off. At this point then, your pod is completely finished. So I'm going to put mine on a silver chain, and I'll wear that silver little chain. But it's a cute idea for you can see kind of the one without the little frills and the one with the frills for these nice little pea pod pendants. If you want to create them, again, at the beginning of the video, we have the little drop down underneath at the date stamp, which will have materials. I forgot to mention too, if you guys do want to do a bigger pod in the middle or a bigger actual pea pod, you just do more rows of your ladder and your herringbone stitch. So that's an idea for you as well. But hopefully you guys have a chance to make these fun gifts. You could do it for a friend, put 2 peas in the middle, and do a smaller pea pod, do a longer pea pod, and kind of change it up as well. I had fun creating these, and I hope you guys do as well. As always, if you like this YouTube video, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, get regular updates on different videos that we do, regular updates on new products that we carry, and what's going on in the beading world. You can also purchase from me online at potomacbeads.com or check out one of our Potomac Bead locations, shop from us there, and gather supplies. Also, stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and all those good social media platforms, as well as if you get a chance, join our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. There you can show off your fun projects like I did just recently with this little pea pod. You can get ideas, you can get suggestions, and have fun creating there as well. As always, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating the little pea pod pendant.